Okay. Good evening. Happy Teachers' Day to all my teachers and all the teachers of Odisha and our country, and all the teachers with us today here. So, and also a very good wishes to my students. They made our day today. So today's webinar, I welcome you all to our Ruby Eye Hospital at Berhampur. So we are organizing this broadcast thought through the hospital and with a Ganesh Bandhana. Okay. So let us have a round through the hospital with a
गणाध्यक्षाय धीमहि गुणशरीराय गुणमण्डिताय गुणेशानाय धीमहि गुणातीताय गुणाधीशाय गुणप्रविष्टाय धीमहि एकदन्ताय वक्रतुण्डाय गौरीतनयाय धीमहि.
Thank you. Thank you for the round of the hospital. And ours is of course, not yet received the NABH accreditation, but already we are prepared and we are waiting for the virtual inspection shortly. And also we are proud enough to inform you that we have been selected by DNB board or NBE board to start the PG diploma course. There is a 2 years course shortly in our hospital. So with these few words, I welcome you all to our hospital, that is Ruby Eye Hospital. Now we start the webinar, and now I hand over the mic to Dr. Shweta Patra to welcome you all the guests to this webinar. Thank you. Now it is over to Shweta.
My screen is visible?
Yes, it's visible. Continue.
A very good evening to one and all present here. I, on behalf of Ruby Eye Hospital, welcome all our speakers and viewers to this CME on Glaucoma Challenge. So Glaucoma continues to be an enigmatic disease with its cause still unknown. It is that just we can only treat or manage the modifiable risk factors to control the progression of optic nerve damage. Over the past few years, there has been various developments in the field of management of glaucoma, but it's still a challenge to manage few cases of glaucoma. So once we suspect a patient with glaucoma, the next challenge is to choose the appropriate tool in our practice which helps us to see the efficient yet cost-effective diagnostics. Next, once we diagnose it, then next step is whether we should go for medical or surgical management. And if we go for a medical management, and when we want to shift to the surgical management, what is the right time for a surgical intervention? Then when should lasers be used in the sequence of treatment? And whether there are any new medications on the horizon? And what about generics? So next, finally, most of our patients or a few of our patients are financially not very well to do and maybe uneducated also. So how do we incorporate concerns about cost and compliance in our practices? So all we can do is be better prepared today than yesterday and better prepared tomorrow than today. So therefore, we have our speakers with us today who are really skilled and proficient in their specialities, and they are going to share their experience with us. So I welcome all of our speakers once again for joining with us today. And it is my privilege to introduce all of you to our viewers. So first I'll be introducing ma'am, Dr. Mayuri B. Khamar. She is glaucoma consultant at Acura Eye Care and Research Center, Ahmedabad. And she is working as a glaucoma specialist for the last 35 years. She has been awarded several times for her research work and papers at several prestigious forums like AIOS and Glaucoma Society of India. And she has presented and published numerous papers in several national and international podiums. And she has held several organizational positions for GSI and GOS and AOS. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. Next, we have Dr. Murli Ariga, who is the Director and Senior Consultant of Swami Eye Clinic and Chennai Glaucoma Foundation. He is the Head, Department of Ophthalmology, Sundaram Medical Foundation, and Director, Research and Head of Glaucoma Services, MNI Hospitals, Chennai. So he holds several reputed positions in various prestigious society of our country and Tamil Nadu. And he is a proficient ophthalmic practitioners with special interest in glaucoma, cataract, phaco, refractive surgery, and lasers. He was trained in India and also in several international hospitals of USA and Singapore. He has more than 30 publications and also has several videos on automated perimetry and trabeculectomy. He has authored several chapters in glaucoma. He has made numerous presentations at national and international meetings, and he's a leader and is a principal investigator in many ongoing multi-center clinical trials in India. He is actively involved in glaucoma awareness programs in several parts of the Tamil Nadu and also in different parts of India. Next, we have Dr. Manish Singh with us. He is an ex-consultant Shankar Netralaya and a senior consultant in glaucoma and cataract services in BBI Foundation, Kolkata. He was awarded the Best Consultant Shankar Netralaya in the year 2010 to 2011. He was the Eastern Zonal Representative of Glaucoma Society of India and East Indian Zonal Coordinator of Glaucoma India Education Program in the year 2016 to 2018. We have Dr. Prashant Srivastav. He was a long-term fellowship. He did his long-term fellowship in glaucoma from Shankar Netralaya and was an ex-consultant in Department of Glaucoma, Shankara Netralaya. Presently, he is the glaucoma consultant in BBI Foundation, Kolkata. He has been an instructor and speaker in various ophthalmic forums and has several publications in peer-reviewed journals to his name. And finally, we have Dr. Praveen Subudhi, the in-house cornea consultant of Ruby Eye Hospital. He did his fellowship from Arvind Eye Hospital and ICO from Bern, Switzerland. He has 16 publications in various national and international journals and has been a reviewer in several articles. So he has also presented in several national and international forums. So once again, thank you everybody and welcome all of you to this CME Come webinar. And finally, I would also wish all my teachers a very happy Teachers' Day. We are because of you only. So thank you everybody for teaching us, supporting us, guiding us and inspiring us. So thank you. I think let's have a wonderful CME and maybe learn some tips so that we face this glaucoma challenge better. So I would request Dr. Prashant Srivastav to begin his presentation. Sir, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shweta. First, at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. B.N.R. Subudhi sir and the Sun Pharma for organizing this event and making me a part of this program. And I wish all of us a very happy Teachers' Day. I'm very fortunate and privileged to be sharing the dais with such great teachers of the nation. I don't have any presentation. I'll just talk about a brief overview of glaucoma treatment and glaucoma management and the surgery. Just a brief overview. So, as Dr. Shweta has already described, the glaucoma is a chronic progressive or progressive optic neuropathy where the changes starts at the retinal ganglionic cell, and the changes are pressure-induced apoptosis of the ganglionic cell, which lead to nerve fiber layer loss, and eventually patient may go blind if we don't interrupt the pathogenesis. So the thing is we have to stop the pathogenesis of the disease, but there is only one modifiable risk factor which can be changed or modified is the intraocular pressure here. So all of the treatment is based, whether medical, surgical or laser, is based on to control or aim to control intraocular pressure only. So what is essential is to measure the intraocular pressure correctly. So whenever we are using a machine, whether it's Goldmann applanation tonometry or any other technique to measure the intraocular pressure, we have to correlate that with whether the reading is accurate or not. So if you're doing with Goldmann, we have to correct it with pachymetry and correlate it. If sometimes we may be dealing with a case of ocular hypertension. If we don't have access to a Goldmann applanation tonometer, then we can use other tools also like NCT or CODs also as a screening tool or to start treatment. It's not that they are not completely wrong or it's inappropriate to use them. The only thing is in case of higher intraocular pressure and the cases of high ocular rigidity, the readings are not so accurate. So any tool to correctly measure the intraocular pressure is sufficient to start the management of glaucoma. And the next is to, Madam will be talking about the medical management and surgical management, also diagnosis part of it. So in the medical management, just one thing which I would like to share is in case of young individual, particularly in case of juvenile opening glaucoma or any patients who starts glaucoma at relatively earlier age, we have to be little more aggressive for the treatment as compared to the people who start glaucoma at elderly. The reason behind it, the chances of going into the zone of disability is much higher for a younger patient. So we have to be little more aggressive for younger patients as compared to elderly patients. For elderly patients, we can be a little less aggressive or we can observe also for some time. But for younger, we have to start right away and very aggressively. And in the surgical, and whenever we feel that the control of intraocular pressure is not adequate, and we document that and we see that there's documented increase in the field loss or there's progression of glaucoma, we should not ponder, we should not think much, and we should plan the glaucoma surgery immediately. Because glaucoma surgery has got little bad name because of the chances of complication and chances of blindness associated with that. But if it is done methodically and with proper mindset and well-prepared mind, so the chances of achieving a great success is very high. Only one point I would like to add here: the chances of a patient becoming blind after a glaucoma surgery is mostly because of hypotony, low intraocular pressure after surgery. It's never or very less chances that the patient go blind because of high intraocular pressure after the surgery. So it is very essential to titrate the degree of filtration after the surgery. So use of reusable suture is a must, and every one of us should master to use reusable suture and when to remove it, how to apply it. So this is the thing we should be mastered to make our surgical results better and decrease the chances of complications. With all that, I will hand over the mic to Madam Mayuri ma'am, which will start the first topic of the day. Over to you, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am.
Okay.
So, ma'am will be talking about daily conundrums in the glaucoma practice. She will be talking about
on this webinar. Dr. Subhuti, I thank you as well as Sun Pharma and Manish for having me here. See, in this talk of mine, I'm going to talk on only the cases, the different type of cases and small trivia that you should keep in your mind that helps you in the management of that particular case. So first case is the 59-year-old man who had a gradual diminution of vision and floaters in the left eye since 6 months and diagnosed to have glaucoma left eye since past 9 years. And he is currently on the brimonidine eye drops 2 times a day. A known case of diabetes, well controlled, no family history of glaucoma, and no significant refractive error or the previous eye disease or the trauma. So On his first visit, the binocular vision is shown here, very minimum refractive error, 69 part and 69 in the left eye. Intraocular pressure right eye was 16 and the left eye was not under control in spite of the medication patient was using. It was 23 and the pachymetry was almost within the normal range. This is the picture of right eye, normal, and the left eye is this. And we found here, if you see carefully this area, there is a small tear in the sphincter. And that gave us a clue that something, not only the gonioscopy, but that slit lamp examination, if you could have done it without even doing gonioscopy, that sphincter tear should arouse a suspicion. Why? Because this is a unilateral advanced case of glaucoma. Slit lamp shows sphincter tear. Gonioscopy has angle recession and black ball sign. So we again took the detailed history of this patient. Patient was 59. And at this age, he may not remember that he had a ball injury in early childhood. After an inquiry, he has lost his parent, but somehow they found out that he had a ball injury in the. So diagnosis was made left eye traumatic glaucoma, and we added timolol eye drops to the brimonidine. And after 1 year follow-up, still he is maintaining good visual outcome as well as the intraocular pressure, which is under control. So take home message from his is history is very, very important. At least pay some time, and more the chair time you pay for the diagnosis, taking history is better. Look at the subtle signs like sphincter tear in this area, and the gonioscopy is must in all the cases of the glaucoma or whatever patients that you see in routine OPD with the shallow chamber after 40-45. One has to have a gonioscopy in the suspicious cases. Now, second case, again young gentleman who has a floaters and he is unhappy about his quality of vision in left eye since 2.5 months. The left eye triamcinolone injection was given elsewhere by the retinal surgeon 2 months back for his pars planitis. And both eye phaco surgery was done in the past, and family history not significant, and systemic history, he was hypertensive for last 10 years and well under control with the medication. The vision in both the eyes was 6/6 and 6 for near. This is right eye, absolutely fine. And this is a picture of left eye showing us the subtenon depot as shown in this area. After lifting the lid, we could see the depot in the supratemporal quadrant. So gonioscopy was done. It was normal, open angles, and the pachymetry was thin cornea in both the eyes. But the pressure in the left eye was 46 millimeter of mercury. And the OCT we did to find out whether patient had any significant macular edema because of the previous inflammation, but it was none, and the fundus was normal. So the diagnosis was made the left eye steroid induced glaucoma, and tricot depot, which is a sustained release, and the release is up to 4 to 6 months, is the cause here. So the treatment started in form of topical dorzolamide timolol drops, brimonidine, and tablet Diamox straight was given, and was given 2 times a day with the potassium supplement orally. And the patient was followed up after 3 days. And after 3 days intraocular pressure was 16 millimeter of mercury. We stopped the Diamox tablet and topical treatment continued, and patient was kept under close follow-up. So after 4 months of follow-up, now the intraocular pressure started fluctuating. It ranged between 22 to 40 millimeter of mercury. Patient was also not happy, and we were also not happy about the outcome that we are having, and we are losing the control over intraocular pressure even with the maximum tolerated treatment. But still we decided to wait, and we continue with the topical oral Diamox, as well as now we added liquid glycerol also. So after 6 months of injection, because it was an uncontrolled intraocular pressure and the triamcinolone still was present in that particular quadrant, we took the retinal surgeon's opinion. They said we have now no need for this, no active inflammation, and you can easily remove this depot. So we decided whether to go with the conservative management, continue with the same and wait for that effect of steroid to go away, or remove this depot, or remove the depot as well as anti-glaucoma surgery to be done with or without modulation. That was also a questionable thing, because the depot is there, it is impossible to remove the whole bunch, and this may be of help in the post-operative healing process. So we decided to do the removal of the triamcinolone as well as the trabeculectomy alone, and we avoided mitomycin C in this particular patient. And this is how the patient had an outcome after 1 month of prep. Good vision, quiet eye, and intraocular pressure was 8 to 10 millimeter with excellent healthy blood. So many studies are there in the literature, and the word of caution here is 1/3 of the population can be a moderate responder or very high responder, which is 4 to 6%. So when anybody has taken this steroid in a depot form, one has to keep an eye on that patient for the intraocular pressure. I have seen in my practice that after giving intravitreal injections or the depot, the retinal guys are happy about their outcome, but usually the intraocular pressure is not being frequently checked. So it is a risk of the ocular hypertension after the steroid given even in the intravitreal injection form. So take home message here is, this depot preparation should be used very judiciously. It is a notorious drug. Fluctuating IOP and intractable glaucoma is also a possibility, and that's why patients should be kept under regular follow-up up to 4 to 6 months. Third case, for the diagnostic, 42 years female patient who had a high myopia and glaucoma diagnosed since 1 year, was using dorzolamide and timolol eye drops 2 times a day, as well as latanoprost eye drops at bedtime. And the pachymetry was normal, vision was normal. The applanation tonometry was right eye 22 and left eye 25 millimeter of mercury. And if you see carefully, the Krukenberg spindles were nicely seen on the cornea, and after dilatation of the pupil, you can see the pigmented lines beautifully seen on the anterior lens capsule. So the gonioscopy was done, and it showed grade 3 to 4 pigmentation with a wide open angle glaucoma, and the diagnosis was made with this is the backward bowing of the iris, and that's why pigmentary glaucoma many a times can have a reverse pupillary block glaucoma. And this is fortunately the very healthy fundus examination, and the GDX was at that time was done, and the perimetry was also luckily normal in this patient. So what should be the next management? Patient had already dorzolamide, timolol, as well as PG analog. So should we add pilocarpine, considering that patient may have a backward bowing and pupillary block, or any role of SLT in this particular patient? I have done many SLTs, and pigmentary glaucoma, one word of caution is, because we are treating the pigmented melanocytes. So here, when you want to do it quadrant wise, not the 180 or a 360 degree, because these patients are likely to have a more reaction compared to the non-pigmented trabecular meshwork. Or should we just observe, because the disc is healthy, field is healthy, we can wait for some time. And one more case, a young medical student, 22 years old, has an acute onset of pain, redness, and blurring of the vision in left eye since last 10 days. And when we saw him, the pressure was 46 millimeter of mercury. So the injection mannitol intravenously was given immediately, and the timolol we started, a primolidine tablet Diamox was given BID for 3 days, and post mannitol IOP remains still high, 37 millimeter of mercury. No history of trauma or similar attack in the past, no family history. The vision was 6.6 and 6.9, and the pachymetry in left eye, because of the high pressure, was on a higher side because it was edematous, slightly hazy cornea. And after the 3 days of treatment, the pressure reduced to 21 millimeter of mercury. Now, what we observed here, if you see carefully, there are few KPs. It may not be a many, but these patients had a few KPs that are there, and which was a diagnostic for us. And the gonioscopy showed the bizarre form of patchy pigmentation like this in 360 degree. and at places a small tiny goniosynechias were seen. So I decided because it is an abnormal goniopigmentation, let me take the picture of this patient. And fundus examination of this patient had a healthy optic nerve. So while doing the examination, while clicking the picture, I started seeing the blood has started coming up in this area of this is called Amsler's sign. And gradually the whole area was filled up with the blood in 360 degree, and this is not so common. So I was fortunate enough to see this, and you can see the micro vessels leaking in that area. And so diagnosis was made. It was inflammatory glaucoma, Poschner-Schlossman syndrome, and we started with the brimonidine, timolol eye drops, prednisolone, and cyclopentolate. So next day when patient came, the pressure was 25. Cells were there, but very few KPs were there, and one after next gonioscopy, still that superior quadrant, few vessels were seen. We continue with the same treatment. This is how it was on the second day, and after 1 week he became normal, and that persistent new vessels were there in the superior quadrant, and we continue with but we taper the anti-glaucoma medication. The prednisolone was tapered over a period of time, and cycloplegic after 7 days we stop it. Third week presentation, no vessels, no KPs, and everything appeared to be okay. Now the pearl here is, these are the unilateral glaucoma. See, I have included 3 cases which were unilateral, and in those cases, maybe in our discussion we will have a discussion on that. One has to be careful in diagnosis. Unilateral cases can be pigmentary glaucoma, it can be steroid-induced glaucoma, it can be post-traumatic glaucoma or something like this, which can give you a unilateral glaucoma. Now, one surgical situation that I will be describing, this is ideal blab, diffuse low-lying blab on day 1 with IOP lower into lower teens, normal chamber depth and watertight wound. One has to do Siddle test in all the post-op cases. And in what are the complications that you can have? A shallow chamber is the most common in early post-op. And I will not discuss all this. I will only have 1 or 2 cases on these 2, wound leak as well as the overfilling blab. How I managed. 39-year male who had a open angle glaucoma, and he was on 2 drugs, and in the right eye, and the left eye trabeculectomy mitomycin C was done. And on day 1, he was fine. Vision was 6/9 with the glasses. 7 millimeter of mercury was intraocular pressure. Well-formed blab, Siegel's negative, wound okay, and chamber was well. No cells flared. So we were happy. On 5th day, on second follow-up, he came with the discomfort, and the left eye vision was 6/9. Intraocular pressure was 8 millimeter of mercury, but the slit lamp showed pigment dusting on the endothelium. And there are few cells also in that patient, and the blab was not elevated, it was a flat blab, though the chamber depth was normal in this patient. So what could be the possible reason why there is a discomfort and the dispersion? So try to look at this blab area, which was a flat blab. This is a releasable suture. You can see that coming out here. A box suture and 2 vein sutures. Everything appeared to be okay, but something is not well. This is a small area of a gap, and it was lying exactly on the area of the trabeculectomy triangular flap. So the small hole here, 1 to 2 millimeter in the size, and the 3 millimeter away from the limbus is a problem now. So we did the Siddle test and it was positive. So what are the options in this patient? How would you manage this patient? Control the inflammation obviously and observe the patient. Patching has no role in this particular piece. You may place the bandage contact lens or a scleral shell if the hole is far away from the limbus, but this was nearer to the limbus, so that is not the option. Or you can repair the buttonhole or put a tissue groove on the top of that buttonhole. What we did, we put the BCL here, and it was a large size, 14.5 millimeter diameter, and we continue with the topical steroid antibiotic drops. Cyclopentolate was put for 3 days, and we asked him to come for the next day. And after 3 days of the BCL, you see something is appearing. It is not now full buttonhole. The size is smaller, and BCL was well placed in that particular area. So it was a healing sign, and chamber was deeply formed, no cells flare. 5th day, now the hole is not visible, and the Seedles was negative. Chamber was quiet. So this is how we manage it, only by using a small thing, BCL, that saved us. Now this is situation second. Trabeculectomy was done elsewhere. He had a leaky wound. The surgeon tried to suture the wound again and again. And then after 5 days, chamber never formed. I remained soft and it was a leaky wound. Patient was sent to us. This is how it was. So we decided to put the BCL with the CD there. We kept it. Conservative treatment was given to this patient and we followed him. Atropinization was also done. Patient's vision improved to 624, and you can see chamber has also formed on day 5. But on day 9, after removing the BCL, we saw that the CDAL is still positive. It was a huge area of the leak. So now we decided not to wait further, and we did the wound reconstruction. We did the advancement of the conjunctiva with the corneal fixation suture, so there should not be any retraction. And the air bubble was injected to form the chamber. And this is how day 1 it looked, Seedals negative. And on 8th day, everything was win-win situation. The pressure was normal. 2 years follow-up I have of this patient. Vision is 624 part. Nuclear sclerosis is coming up, and then flat or almost diffuse bleb, but still the intraocular pressure without any medication is under well control. And last situation is flat bleb. Young female, and anti-glaucoma surgery was done 5 months before 5 months, and patient has a shallow chamber with the failed bleb, and intraocular pressure was 18 with the 3 anti-glaucoma medication, and patient was referred one-eyed lady. So we decided to have a 2-stage surgery in this patient. We may go with the cataract surgery first and do the glaucoma surgery. So 4 months after cataract surgery, 26 millimeter of mercury, intraocular pressure with maximum drug was there, and we decided to do retrab, which was done on the supratemporal quadrant, which was very healthy area in that part. So when we did the day 1, hypotony was there, and the large bleb was seen on the supratemporal area. Air was locked. That was a sign of the shock, ciliary shock. Very shallow chamber, no leakage. On 4th day, conservative management, we continue. BCL trial was given, but it was unable to be there because of the 2 blebs in the superior area, and it was not stable. So what we decided after 15 days of all this trial of BCL, and we decided that we have to do something in this particular area. It was overfiltering. You can see the huge flap here. This is where it is, and there was no leak, and chamber was shallow. So simply we took a 1 compression suture starting from here across his goal, and then we came back. So this compression suture made this flat filtering bleb flat, and chamber started forming. And after 1 month of follow-up, you can see that chamber is still not that deep, but it is there all over, and the vision improved to 612, and the pressure was 12 millimeter of mercury. 1 year follow-up, everything is fine. So friends, take home message from this is conservative approach is always better rather than jumping to another surgical management on 2nd day or 1st week. Intervention of antechamber formation should be when it should be done. That is a question. I will do only when there is a lenticular touch to the cornea. I will wait for a week or 2 before I decide to do intervention surgically. So concluding, keep cool and vigilant eye is key to the success for the managing of shallow chamber. post-operatively, and prophylactic measures may prevent or lessen the chance of anterior chamber. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you so much. Such a lovely talk and so much informative. All the practical tips are given by ma'am, and so many take-home messages. One of which is importance of gonioscopy in doing all the cases of glaucoma. In any case where you have high intraocular pressure, or any case where there is a family history or any suspect of glaucoma, we must do gonioscopy. Cannot skip this stage. And with 4-minute gonioscopy, it is very easy to do. Just put a drop of Paracaine. You don't need any cochlear fluid. It is done in 30 seconds. So there is no point skipping a gonioscopy in any of the case. So when there's a question from the audience, what is the latest management for the chronic simple glaucoma? I thought the audience, he wanted to ask what is the medical management of chronic simple glaucoma.
Okay. In my case, all cases of open angle glaucoma, if there is a no contraindication, it is a primary glaucoma, I start with PG analog. First I decide what is the target pressure, and it is to be decided looking at the age of the patient, severity of the disease, and what is the baseline intraocular pressure. For example, it is the 25 millimeter of mercury baseline intraocular pressure, CDR is about 7, and there is a 1 arcuate scotoma. In that case, one drug may be sufficient, and in that case, I will use PG analog. Advantage of PG analog is it is once a day, so compliance is better. No systemic side effect most of the time, except hyperemia or elongation of lashes and pigmentation. That is the problem, and it usually disappears after 5-6 days. So for me, and the PG analog may have endurance. If patient miss one dose, it can last for at least 30 hours or so. So many studies are there. So unless it is a secondary glaucoma or contraindication to PG, I start with the PG analog. That is my preference of choice.
Thank you so much. So PG analog is the drug of choice in nowadays in most of the cases of glaucoma because of the endurance, and the compliance of therapy is very good. And ma'am has shown a beautiful case of uveitic glaucoma in which we saw Amsler sign, something which is rarely seen and rare to see. So the next question to you, ma'am, is so what is your preferred anti-glaucoma treatment for uveitic glaucoma?
Uveitic glaucoma, do not use PG analog and pilocarpine. That is the dictum. You may start with the brimonidine, dorzolamide, timolol, any three of. If there is no contraindication like COPD or something like that, I will like to use timolol. But if patient is young, then I prefer to use brimonidine or dorzolamide.
Any case of
but if it is an inflammatory glaucoma, see any secondary glaucoma, remember that treat the cause and then glaucoma is a secondary treatment. So here the treatment of choice will.
So-called glaucoma surgeon, I've been doing surgery for many years, you know, but the flap is small, a flap is large, or there's something to do with the thickness of the flap, or the conjunctival suturing, or the ostium itself, and what you have done. So so many of these factors come into play when whether it's angle closure glaucoma or open angle glaucoma, the iridotomy is patent or not, whether there was a blood clot in the inside the eye which can block the ostium. So I think identifying the cause for the problem is more important than doing the same thing for every patient. That's why I think she has very clearly pointed out, identify the cause.
Only one case, hypotony and shallow chamber.
Correct.
If it is a blocked iridectomy, it may have a high pressure.
So identifying
the management in that
analysis, exactly. Analyzing systematically the pressure, the chamber depth, the reason for the shallow chamber, the block, that's where the judgment comes in. And if you're not sure, take help from a senior colleague, because it makes a lot of, we all do that all the time, even now, that we keep asking a senior colleague to find out what could be a possible reason. And sometimes the solution is very simple. Simply doing nothing can actually solve the problem in a week's time.
Yes, keep cool. Don't jump.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the lovely presentation. Now we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Manish from Calcutta. He'll be talking about glaucoma muscularis, all the confusing cases of glaucoma. So over to you, sir, and welcome.
First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Subudhi sir and Dr. Prashant for this invitation, and it's really a pleasure to be part of this program, sharing the stage with Mayuri madam and Dr. Murli. So basically, I'll be sharing 4 cases which can mimic glaucoma. So basically, these are the masquerades which I like to share today. So first, I'll tell you how it all started. I think in early part of my consultancy, I remember this patient had come to me. This was a 38-year-old gentleman who was already undergoing treatment for juvenile open-angle glaucoma for almost a year. And when he came to in our OPD, I think at that time was in Shankar Netralaya, the pressure was around 12 millimeter mercury on brimonidine. And I saw the records. There was one IOP recording of 22 millimeter mercury on a non-contact tonometer, open angle, and CCT was slightly on the higher side. So when I saw the field, this was a very, very advanced field loss. So if you just look at the field, it appeared like I'm dealing with a case of a very advanced glaucoma. And OCT also showed thinning of the RNFL, so it was sort of corresponding with the fields. But when I saw the disc, if you see the disc in the right eye, the left eye looks to be almost 0.9 cupping. There is hardly any superior rim left. Inferiorly also almost it has reached up to the margin of the disc. But if you see the right eye, it's on around 0.7. It's not that much of cupping. So when you have a field like this, when you have almost totally gone, and all of us who have been treating glaucoma, we know when you have a field like this, you will have a total cupping, 0.9, 0.99 cupping, will be like hardly any rim left. But in this case, you can see there is not much of cupping. So whenever you have this type of discrepancy, you should always try to think that probably there is something more than a typical glaucoma. Plus the pressure also has not been that high. You see very clearly there is definitely some amount of pallor in both the eyes. And clinical correlation is extremely important in these patients. As I was telling you, this amount of cupping, if you think from glaucoma point of view, is definitely not matching with this type of field loss. When we took the history in detail, basically patient had a history of consumption of country liquor. And this was a case of methyl alcohol poisoning. And a lot of these methyl alcohol poisoning, when you're seeing after a year, 2 years, sometimes 3-4 years, they present with this type of glaucomatous cupping. And if you have not taken the history properly, at the first look, you will get confused that probably you are dealing with a case of a glaucoma. So you should keep in mind that these cases are not totally rare. And now with more and more use of sanitizers which we are using, and adulterated sanitizer with methanol, we don't know, we might be seeing more methyl alcohol poisonings in the near future. Another point I like to highlight here is that if you go based purely on the investigation, sometimes you're bound to get confused. For example, a lot of time our patient will send you a WhatsApp report, patient will send you a perimetry, and you see this perimetry and patient will ask for your opinion. Or patient will send you just an OCT report and ask for your opinion. It's very risky. Glaucoma is not that easy that you can treat on a WhatsApp or even on a tele consultation, because just looking at the perimetry, looking at the OCT can be very misleading, because this type of OCT can be in glaucoma, sometimes even a traumatic optic neuropathy, methyl alcohol poisoning, even ischemic optic neuropathy can present thinning like this. So just purely based on the OCT showing some red area, that actually means nothing. The disc, the field, and the OCT has to be clinically correlated to come to a conclusion. So especially for young ophthalmites, I must say, unless you have seen the patient in totality, don't comment on one investigation, because you're bound to fall into problem. So whenever you have a patient who are young, coming as normal tension glaucomas, always try to think beyond glaucoma, because normal tension glaucoma in general is a disease of the elderly population. More important, whenever you have pallor, try to think of other causes. Although very rarely in uveitic glaucomas or high pressure glaucoma, like even juvenile glaucoma with very high pressure, sometimes in high pressure steroid glaucoma, you can have pallor because of high pressure induced ischemia. But generally the pallor is an indication that you probably are dealing with a non-glaucomatous cause. Also, early involvement of central vision. You have little bit of cupping, but the central vision is affected. Early involvement of color vision are indication that probably you are dealing with something more than glaucoma. There have been multiple studies. One of the earliest studies in 1980 by Probe has shown that pallor actually is 94% specific for non-glaucomatous cupping. So pallor definitely has to be taken into account. And focal and diffuse rim loss. If you find a focal or diffuse rim loss, then you almost have 87% specificity for glaucoma. I'll come to the second case. This again is a patient who was very dear to us because his father happens to be my patient, and I have done a glaucoma surgery in his father. His brother also is a glaucoma patient. So this patient used to regularly come with his father and his brother, and he used to come for his own checkup also. And because He had a very strong family history. We had done a disc photograph, we have done a baseline field for him, and everything was pretty okay. The visions were normal, wide open angle, pressures were normal, and a 0.65 healthy disc. So these type of patients, we generally ask the patient to be under a yearly checkup, and he was very meticulous with his checkup. So again in April 2014 he came. There was a mild inferior rim slope, CCT was normal, fees were normal. Later on again after 6 months he came for follow-up. So he used to come with his father for follow-up, and patient was pretty regular with his checkup. This is the field in 2014. You can see is almost normal. There's 1 or 2 artifacts, hardly anything significant. In 2016 when he came, the pressure was 19. When we did a field, we saw some superior defects in both the eyes, but they were not very specific of glaucoma, not following the arcuate pattern. So we thought it's more of a artifact around the blind spot, and we didn't take it very seriously. Again in 2018 he came back again, but there we found that it seems like there is a field defect which is enlarging from the blind spot, but it is respecting the vertical meridian, and this time the pressure also has increased to 22. So there was definitely a component of glaucoma going on because of a strong family history, but the field was not typical of glaucoma. And if you see the field in both the eyes, it was looking more like an early quadrantanopic defect. However, the disc had some inferior slope, but then this field was definitely not corresponding with the disc. When the right eye also had some inferior slope. But if you see the field over 4 years, from normal to an localized defect, so more increased defect in the superior temporal quadrant. Similarly, in the left eye also you can see gradually there was an increase of field defect. So definitely we are seeing something atypical, something which we not normally see in a glaucoma patient. So in this case, wherever you have this type of atypical presentation, you should be going for a neuroimaging. And when we did neuroimaging, patient actually had a pituitary microadenoma. Thankfully, the patient underwent surgery. You can see the post-op picture, there was no residual, and the visual field also improved. So very important, wherever you have this type of atypical presentation not corresponding with your disc, and you see the field sort of obeying the vertical meridian localized to one quadrant, you should consider going for a neuroimaging. I'll show you a similar case, Mr. Prasad, who was again a known case of normal tension glaucoma, already on prostaglandin for 2 years. And he came to us with the pachymetry was around 540, and I went to the old records. I saw that pressure was never more than 16 millimeter mercury. Vision, at the time of presentation to us, was just counting finger in the right eye, and left eye had a 6.6 and 6 vision. But just 6 months back, the vision was 6.9 in the right eye and 6.6 in the left eye. The pressure was normal, the angles were open. So there was a gross deterioration of vision in just 6 months. If you see the disc, however, doesn't look to be that bad. Right eye maybe around maximum 0.7 to 0.8. I'm sorry for the quality of the picture because these were pictures taken from a disc photograph. So this again left eye around 0.8. So if you see from glaucoma point of view, a 0.7 or 0.8 disc will not give you a counting finger vision. This is again another photograph of disc. Again, seeing the field, very, very advanced field loss in right eye. Again, not matching with your disc finding. So the point I was highlighting, the clinical evaluation is extremely important. I personally believe how good you evaluate your disc determines how good you can treat your glaucoma patient. Among all the investigation, the aplanation, tonometry, pachymetry, gonioscopy, I believe disc evaluation probably is the most important, because at any given day, glaucoma is a disease of the optic disc. So you have to spend more time with the disc, evaluate in detail, and have to clinically correlate with your OCT and the field finding. So you see the right eye, there was such an advanced loss, but the left eye was almost normal. And if you see the disc, both discs look to be pretty much okay. Also interestingly, I went to the record, I saw old field of this patient for the right eye and the left eye again was normal. But interesting, you see, just a matter of 6 months, there is so much of progression in the right eye. So this is a patient who is established case of glaucoma, has been on anti-glaucoma medication for years, comes to us with a gross deterioration of vision, significant progression of field in just a matter of 6 months. So whenever you have a patient, either I showed the previous case of atypical presentation or unusual progression, always consider neuroimaging. In this case, we found that patient actually had a sphenoidal carcinoma. It was a very unusual case. It was a sphenoidal mass with the bony erosion and optic nerve compression, and that was the reason why one eye had such a quick deterioration of the visual field. Finally, it was found to have a sphenoidal carcinoma after biopsy. So the take-home message of last two cases was: one, any atypical presentation, any rapid unexplained progression, don't be hesitant to consider neuroimaging, especially for young ophthalmologists who are starting their practice. A lot of time what I used to feel, you are doing a neuroimaging, there is a cost involved, so often I used to avoid it. Don't do that. MRI is preferable. If you think MRI is too costly, you can go for a CT scan. If again a cost is the issue, you can refer the patient to a medical college where it can be done at a low cost, or maybe sometime even free. What I tell my patient, look, maybe if I'm doing 100, say 10, 20 patient will have something positive. But for that 10, 20 patient, this is going to be a life-changing diagnosis. You cannot afford to miss a sphenoidal carcinoma or a pituitary tumor or a meningioma in your patient, because this can be life-threatening for your patient. So whenever you have a doubt, do consider imaging. I'll just come to the last case. This is a Mr. Jha who again came for a consultation. This patient was again also on prostaglandins. A lot of these patients, based on the disc finding or maybe based on the perimetry, do get treated for glaucoma, because we know in India almost 50% of patients who are undergoing treatment for glaucoma probably don't have glaucoma. So that's a huge number of patients. This patient also, the CCT was normal, angles were open on gonioscopy, right eye disc was field was normal, left eye field had superior defect. So again, the baseline pressures were normal. If you just look at the field, looks like a normal tension glaucoma in the left eye, and that is why the patient was treated. As we know, normal tension glaucoma had field defect closer to fixation, and this is typically looking like a normal tension glaucoma. But when you saw the disc, right eye is 0.4, 0.5, perfectly healthy. Left eye, definitely there is an inferior thinning. But again, it's a unilateral presentation. Unilateral glaucoma is generally, not always, generally secondary. So when you have unilateral glaucomas, you should first look into secondary causes. If you see this disc again, the left eye, you can see there it looks to be some defect in the RNFN also. But if you look more clearly, it seems like a localized gray depression in the cup, which is very typical of optic disc pit. So optic disc pit, as we all know, is a congenital defect generally diagnosed based on clinical finding. Also, sometimes OCT can be helpful. So you can see there's a localized and eccentric depression of the disc. There's a small notch here. There's no communication with the retinal spaces in this case, but you can see there's a deep and a localized club commonly seen in optic disc pit. Sometimes in optic disc pit, you can also have these serous spaces with a serous fluid, or you can often have a membrane covering the pit. So sometimes OCT can be useful in helping the diagnosis of optic disc pit, but mostly the diagnosis is clinical. So it was a case of optic disc pit, so we stopped the medication. Whenever you stop the medication, always recheck the pressure after 4 weeks. Preferably do a diurnal IOP, or at least do an office hour diurnal IOP. Document the disc photograph, check the pressure after the washout period, but keep the patient under follow. I always tell my patient, you don't have glaucoma now, but I can't predict whether you'll develop glaucoma after 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years. So you should always keep the patient under at least 6 monthly or a yearly follow-up. This case, the pressures were normal, the patient was kept under follow-up, and I've been following the patient for almost 5 years now. You can see 2014 to 2019, it's just the same field defect the patient is maintaining. There is no progression. The disc also, you can see the vision also is normal. So this patient with optic disc pit is doing well, and thankfully we were able to avoid the anti-glaucoma medication. So these are the cases I wanted to share, and I'll thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manish, for the wonderful presentation. So yeah, very important message here is generally we have a tendency to consider disc pallor as a disc cupping, and we think that disc which is pale and is glaucomatous, which is not true, as is clear from the TROPE study that pallor is 92% specific for non-glaucomatous changes rather than a glaucoma change. In the last case that you showed, the patient was being treated elsewhere as a normal tension glaucoma and came to you for a second opinion. Now there is a doubt that if So how will you proceed for the management? So will you continue with the management of glaucoma? It could be a case of normotension also. So would you continue with anti-glaucoma medication, giving a benefit of treatment or benefit of doubt, sort of that thing, or you will just discontinue the treatment and repeat the field? Should be the flow of treatment or flow chart of the treatment in such cases?
See,
And what is the pattern of field test recommended in all the cases where we suspect neurological disease rather than glaucoma?
so we'll specifically discuss about the case I showed. So what happened, sometime in a OPD, especially in a busy OPD, often if you are seeing the disc undilated, or sometime a lot of time we use the direct ophthalmoscope, or maybe in a hurry, these type of pits are often misdiagnosed as glaucoma. So a proper disc evaluation is extremely crucial, and we all make these mistakes. It's not something that we don't do it. A lot of time these small pits can be overlooked in a deep cup. But when you have made a diagnosis of optic disc pit, then definitely you should be considering stopping the anti-glaucoma medication, because in this particular patient there was no history of raised intraocular pressure. There was no documented raised IOP. The other eye disc is perfectly normal. The primary glaucomas generally are bilateral, not always, but generally are bilateral. So when you have one eye perfectly normal and one eye with optic disc pit, there's no reason why we shouldn't think that probably it's just a case of optic disc pit and there is no glaucoma. When you have made a diagnosis, it is your responsibility to do a proper baseline evaluation. I believe starting medication is easy. Stopping medication is more bigger responsibility, because now if something happens, you are the sole responsible person for that catastrophe. So whenever you're stopping the medication, make sure you have a proper field done. If required, you think your OCT will be useful, you can do that also. Take a disc photograph, stop the medication, check the pressure after the washout period. I always do office diurnal from morning 8 o'clock to evening 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. So I've got 5-6 pressures. I can show the patient, look, this is your photograph, this is a pit, you see the pressures are all normal, so this is no need for treatment, but then you please be under follow-up. Because there have been cases like, for example, ocular hypertension, I've stopped the medicine, pressures were normal, patient was asked to be under follow-up, the patient came back after 6 months, the pressure was still normal, then patient vanished. Came back after 3 years with the early glaucomatous cupping. And then I saw the pressure is turned. I said, look, you have glaucoma. He said, I already had glaucoma. You stopped my medication. I said, no, that time you didn't have glaucoma. I can show you the picture. So this can happen. Suppose you don't know, maybe 3 year, 4 year down the line, a patient pressure may increase or patient can develop something new. So follow-up is crucial. So also because most of us, we are not doing a 24-hour diurnal. So get a proper baseline, do a proper follow-up, and initially 6 monthly follow-up is fine. Later on, once yearly follow-up should be okay. And neurological, you are saying, neurological mostly we do 30-2 for most of our patients.
Thank you, sir. Wonderful presentation, and so many doubts are cleared now. So we'll move on to the next talk. Invite Dr. Murali Arika, sir, and he will be enlightening us with the topic of newer lasers in glaucoma. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Prashant, and I sincerely thank Professor Subudhi and the entire Ruby Eye Hospital team and the Sun Pharma team for having me here this evening. And even though at short notice, I thought I could share some of the points which I do the lasers in glaucoma. The first and foremost is that I have no financial interest in any of the products or the type of laser which I am talking about. Lasers in glaucoma are an attractive treatment option, and they are less invasive than surgery, an office procedure. So most patients are attracted to the word glaucoma laser and lasers for treatment and so on. There are many lasers for management of glaucoma. We have the argon laser, the Nd:YAG, diode, selective laser, carbon dioxide laser, and various ways in which you can deliver the laser into the eye to clamp, transpupillary, contact, transscleral, pars plana, and endoscopic. And the common laser procedure, I think we all know, iridotomy, trabeculoplasty, and cyclodestruction. The less common ones are the ones, I think if the students are in this audience, it would interest them to know that peripheral iridoplasty, pupilloplasty, sphincterotomy, and some group of patients in certain patient case situations, I think all these kind of synochialysis, claviculotomies, and even gonio-photocoagulation of new vessels, and then a deep sclerectomy had sometime been popular in some centers, and that's another glaucoma laser procedure. So common procedures first: laser peripheral iridotomy, what, when, and how. The iridotomy relieves the pupillary block in angular closure glaucoma, and as you can see in the pictures and the schematic, that the pressure difference between the anterior and posterior chamber is relieved, and the pupillary block, the iris Bombay configuration. This is a typical relative pupillary block in which the iridotomy relieves the pupillary block and reduces the intraocular pressure and allows the aqueous to bypass the transpupillary aqueous flow. When you do the iridotomy, it is a must that you should consider iridotomy in PSC and PSCG, which is the new classification of angular closure disease, pupillary block and pseudophakic eyes. And when you have an acute angular closure glaucoma, you can wait till the inflammation subsides, control the IOP medically before you do the iridotomy. And prophylaxis, of course, you would do it in the fellow eye which had an acute angular closure attack. And what about PSCS? You would not do it in all PSCS. You would consider the iridotomy in diabetics and with retinal pathology requiring periodic dilatation and so on. Intraocular pressure elevation and angle closure with dilatation has been noted before, then you could consider prophylactic PA. Nanophthalmos in the fellow eye of malignant glaucoma is another prophylactic indication, at least for me. The use of the NDAG has completely changed the usage of the argon. We don't use argon much now. Most of it is NDAG. It's preferred because the cutting laser faster and much easier to do than the argon laser. How do you do it? You use the Abraham lens, choose a crib and do it in the topical, but pre-treat with pilocarpine. And the energy level depends on the machine and the settings which you are using for the thick iris and which part of the iris you are treating. Avoid the sphincter and keep watching and make sure that there's a gush and you see the pigment coming out before you decide that it is patent. Endpoint would be this deepening and the pigment gush from posterior to anterior chamber. Post laser, manage the intraocular pressure, to continue pilocarpine for a few days. Topical steroids very important, and do the assess the anterior chamber depth. Look at the gonioscopy most importantly after the PI, and of course see the PI patency. So many methods to assess the patency. Transillumination is one. So actually literally see through the visualize the lens through the opening, and gonioscopy is the key. And you can have difficulties with the thick arcus, thick peripheral iris, and you may need to pre-treat and do in more than one sitting. You can have complications like hyphema, bleeding, and blurred vision, transient inflammation, and transient IOP rise, and so on. But in general, serious complications are rare. But word of caution that do not take YAG iridotomy lightly. Take proper consent and make sure you're stopping anticoagulants and so on, and make sure that it is done properly with proper consent and information to the patient. You can get away with most of the time, but sometimes you can end up with a total hyphema, and then you will have to explain to the patient that why a trivial procedure caused vision loss. Trabeculoplasty was used to enhance the aqueous outflow. Started with the Weissenbitter ALT in 1979, and then the SLT became popular after its FDA approval way back in 2000-2001. And you also had the micropulse diode laser trabeculoplasty. Indications: you would do it as a primary therapy when there is poor drug compliance, pregnancy, lactation, and so on. You can actually supplement the therapy and postpone surgery when you are doing the SLT. You can also do it for additional IOP lowering after some procedure is done. Primary open-angle glaucoma, ocular hypertension, exfoliation, pigmented glaucomas, different indications for doing the SLT. And the most important prerequisite is gonioscopy. Do not mistake a pigmented Schwalbe's line for trabecular meshwork and start treating the Schwalbe's line. Make sure your gonioscopy is good before you do the laser. You would not treat when the angle is closed and trabecular meshwork is not visible. There's corneal haze, there's aphakia with vitreous in the chamber, inflamed eyes, neovascularization, active uveitis, and angle recession glaucomas. In all these conditions, the SLT does not work so well. Technique, I will talk basically mainly about the SLT. We would use a lens like the Rich trabeculoplasty lens. My favorite now is the Voke Rapid SLT lens. And you can also, of course, use the Latina lens, is the most popular lens till recently. The ALT was done at the junction of the anterior third and the posterior 2/3. The energy level is set to a point in which you get little blanching and bubble. This is the ALT. The SLT is different, uses a different mechanism of action, selective destruction of pigmented TM cells, and you may get small bubbles. The SLT can be repeatable. Post-op inflammation is almost nil with the SLT, but you can get, of course. The spot size is 400. It's a large spot size laser compared to the 50 micron spot size of the ALT. That's the main difference. With the MLT, it's slightly less. It's about 300 microns. And unique features, the SLT targets only the melanin-rich cells to trabecular meshwork, is non-thermal and repeatable, and therefore can be repeated without many complications. And these are the pictures from journals which tell us that the meshwork remains intact, unlike the ALT where the damage to the meshwork is obvious on histopathology. Laser trabeculoplasty post-laser management, you would actually continue some glaucoma medication till your review. Don't use steroid eye drops. You can check the pressure maybe an hour or two after the laser, and then maybe after 1 week and again after 1 month. The published literature is very clear that the treatment success of SLT and ALT are comparable. So SLT is not inferior to ALT in treatment success. This is from the survey some time back. And of course, the SLT will work like one drug most of the time. Something like one prostaglandin analog, it will work like one drug. And mild complications, discomfort, mild photophobia, very, very rarely you can have a sustained raised intraocular pressure in some group of patients. But follow-up is very, very important. Don't assume that SLT will work for everybody. Don't assume that follow-up is not necessary after SLT. And how do you choose 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 360 degrees for SLT? I generally prefer to do 360 degree SLT for most of my patients. Very rarely, like Madam was pointing out, Dr. Mayuri Madam was pointing out, that I would probably think of doing 180 degrees or even quadrant-wise pigmentation, depending on the intense pigmentation in the trabecular meshwork. You would decide how much of trabecular meshwork to treat, see the response, and then go back and do the rest of it. But generally, SLT you will find works like one drug. Sometimes the intraocular pressure lowering is much better than that. And the recent LIGHT trial, I think you may be aware that the selective laser trabeculoplasty was compared versus the eye drops as first-line treatment for OHT and open-eye glaucoma in a multi-center trial in the UK, and that has clearly found that it's a very cost-effective alternative to drops in many patients with OHG and ocular hypertension. So it is a very useful laser in the armamentarium of the glaucoma treating surgeon. And the new addition in my practice has been the Nano SLT. The Nano SLT is a machine which is very compact, portable, can be attached to any kind of a good slit lamp, which has the appropriate magnification, and the rapid SLT 4-mirror SLT lens, which I use now. And the difference between SLT and ALT, of course, the standard one has been the duration of the laser, 3 nanosecond duration exposure as compared to 0.1 seconds with the ALT. So much less fluence with SLT. Whereas the Nano SLT has got a very high pulse to pulse laser delivery and a pulse duration of only 1 nanosecond with a very fast repetitive repetition of 5 Hz. So therefore, the Nano SLT actually works faster, very efficient, and very low fluence as compared to the regular SLT also. So Nano SLT is really a nice, attractive option. And lastly, coming to the use of the micropulse transscleral diode CPC, and it could probably change the way we are managing glaucoma in the future. We all know cyclodestructive procedure in the past has been cryotherapy, ultrasound, and lasers. And after the Academy Technology reports pointed out the diode is probably the best laser, we have been using the diode laser for many, many years using the standard G probe, which is a continuous wave diode cyclophotocoagulation using the G probe, which actually the anterior edge and the foot plate protrudes about 0.7 millimeters. And this, I think, is very familiar to most of us who have trained in glaucoma centers in many eye hospitals. Standard parameters, 2000 milliseconds and 2000 milliwatts. You hear a pop when you apply the laser. And this actually, the pop represents UVL micro explosion, can cause severe pain and inflammation. Once you get this pop sound, you actually scale down the energy and start using less energy. And conjunctival burns, iritis, pain, hyphema, vitreous hemorrhage, choroidals, and even sympathetic ophthalmia has been reported with the continuous diode CPC. The micropulse is a new recent addition to our treatment armamentarium. And the recent micropulse uses micropulse technology to denature the target tissue while further minimizing the collateral damage to tissues around. And the duty cycle of the micropulse used for this glaucoma application is 31.3% with an on of 0.5 milliseconds and off of 1.1. Usually we do it for 80 seconds in each semicircle above and below, and 2000 milliwatts. Usually done in the OT after a proper peribulbar block, and these are the settings which I use for the laser. And of course the patient has to be monitored because you're giving a block. It is best done with the microscope. Keep a speculum on, wear a glove of course, and then use a lubricant gel so the movement of the laser so above and below is very smooth and comfortable to the patient. A few examples of where this has actually worked very well in my hands. I particularly find it very useful in primary angle closure glaucoma, where you dread doing trabeculectomy in these kind of patients. They're having normal vision, uncontrolled high pressures, PI is patent, very advanced cupping with advanced field loss, and you would dread actually doing this because you know for sure the shallow AC will be there and the vision can drop, cataracts can form, and the risk of malignant glaucoma is there. This is the kind of patients we all know is probably a nightmare when you want to operate. So vision threatening complications are possible. So this particular patient has actually done very well with the micropulse CPC in both eyes. Of course, not done in the same day, but did one eye first, give a little gap, do the other eye also. And similarly, this is another patient with 6/6, 6/12 vision, good control of intraocular pressure with medication, stable, but completely does not tolerate medication at all. Severe hyperemia, you can see the dark circles, the hyperemia, intolerable side effects to the prostaglandins. You would simply default and not use medication on and off. And therefore, we offered the transcleral CPC micropulse to her. And she has literally done very well and so grateful to us that the relief from prostaglandin has been there. Eyes have come back to normal color, and then the pressures are now under control with just one drug, Timolol. And some other examples of where I have done the micropulse. This is one patient, the picture on the left, on your left. First a phacotrab was done, the bleb scar, the bleb needling was done, the bleb didn't elevate, and then finally had very high pressures in a one-eyed patient. And then we went ahead and did the Hammett glaucoma valve. The Hammett valve also started scarring and the pressure went up. And despite measures to revive the bleb, still it would not work. And finally, I had to do a cyclophotocoagulation using the micropulse. The patient still continues to have 6/9, 6/12 vision with this treatment, and then the pressure has finally come down with the micropulse. On the picture on the right is a patient with both eyes Boston K-Pro, in which the pressures were very high, but the pressures cannot be measured in these patients. You started noticing the cupping was gradually increasing, and the corneal surgeon had done an excellent job with the K-Pro, but you find the pressures are increasing and one eye slowly started dropping vision. The other eye also started dropping vision because they have very high pressures, which you can only look at by looking at the optic disc. So therefore, we did one eye first, the micropulse CPC, and then once it did well and stabilized, we did the other eye as well, the micropulse cyclophotocoagulation. A lot of literature published in Survey of Ophthalmology, in European Journal, in Ophthalmology, and many other journals about the use of the transcleral micropulse, and it's really shown a lot of promise in managing different types of difficult as well as mild and moderate glaucomas, and even glaucomas with seeing eyes of 6/6 and 6/9 vision. Said to have a subthreshold cell damage at the level of the pigmented ciliary epithelium, no visible damage. Said to increase uveoscleral outflow and maybe possibly has a pilocarpine-like effect also. So the take-home message: effective and a safe alternative to continuous wave is the micropulse TSCPC. Can be used in mild, moderate, and even advanced glaucomas, and not just intractable glaucomas and eyes with good vision. 30 to 40% drop in the IOP can be expected and reduces the need for medication. No serious complications noted in most of our experience, but long-term studies are definitely needed. I thank you all for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the illustrative presentation, sir. Wonderful presentation, very informative. So I have a basic question for our general ophthalmologist audience. So if you're doing a YAG laser iridotomy in a patient with a very thick iris, and we are not able to complete or make a patent PI in the first go, how long we can keep going on, or what should be done in case of very thick iris where it's difficult to achieve a patent PI in initial few shots?
Absolutely, I think it's a very good question, and then I think we should realize that there is no need. Glaucoma is not a disease which is going to overnight blind the patient, and a YAG PI in many cases is prophylactic, and the pressure may be high, and the patient does not have a very acute problem unless you have an acute attack or something like that. even in an acute attack, you would wait for the inflammation and patient to become comfortable, reduce the intraocular pressure, and then go in for the YAG-PI. And suppose you have a thick iris and you find that boggy iris, and better put in a little bit of steroid, make the iris pattern come back to a little normal, have the iris and corneal edema reduced, and you still find difficulty, don't overdo the laser sitting by doing repeated laser of 30 shots and 50 shots and so on. Do about 6 to 8 shots, you find the pigment is dispersing, you find that it's not going through and through, you better stop there, give steroid eye drops, put some pilocarpine, maintain and reduce the intraocular pressure, and pause for a repeat second sitting, maybe even a week or even 10 days later. I would not hesitate to postpone by a week or 10 days or even 15 days before you go back and do the laser. You can also do an argon laser to stretch out the iris a little bit and then do the YAG through that if you're having a lot of difficulty with thick iris.
So somebody who has not access to argon laser can wait for some more time.
Absolutely. There's no need to rush in and finish it in one sitting.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, one more question is, as you have mentioned clearly that micropulse transclear diverse EPC is a very good tool to control intraocular pressure and it's a very titrable thing. So have you kept that thing for intractable glaucoma only or refractive glaucoma only, or do you do it for a primary procedure in other cases as well?
Actually, initially we were hesitating a bit, and then now we started boldly doing it in 6/6 and 6/9 eyes also. As I mentioned, the examples I showed you, most of them are seeing eyes. All are 6/9, 6/12 primary angle closure glaucomas where I was doing a triab before, and even in eyes with post-PK, particularly secondary glaucomas like post-PK with good vision, clear corneas, Boston K-Pro, as well as my indications for now doing a tube are very less because this laser is literally taken over. And the only thing with this, the intraocular pressure lowering is about 30%, sometimes 40%. So you will not get a great IOP lowering most of the time. So you may need to add medication. Suppose a patient is using 3 or 4 drugs, you will probably come down to 1 or 2 drugs, and it can work well in seeing eyes. You can boldly doing it in seeing eyes. There is a small learning curve in the way you apply it and finding the correct patient and so on. There is a small learning curve of about 5 or 10 patients, and that's it. There's nothing very difficult about doing the micropulse.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. So sir describe about the role of micropulse TSC in post-PK laser. So we'll invite the next speaker, with Dr. Praveen Subudhi, who will be talking about post-PK glaucoma. Welcome, Dr. Praveen Subudhi.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you please confirm whether my slides are visible or not?
Yes, it is visible. Please go on.
So first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Prashant, Dr. Manish, Dr. Mayuri Madam, Dr. Murli Sir for accepting this invitation of Ruby Eye Hospital and giving very nice pearls about glaucoma. I would be talking a very important topic from my perspective because I'm being a corneal surgeon, and this topic is very, very important, which is called as post-PK glaucoma. The problem in keratoplasty is it's not the surgery per se. It's about the post-surgical management. If you are not managing the case properly in the post-operative period, the patient will definitely lead to a loss of vision because of the graft failure as well as due to the glaucoma. And glaucoma plays a very, very important role in post-keratoplasty cases, and any patient who has undergone keratoplasty need to be closely evaluated for glaucoma or closely evaluated for the intraocular pressure, whether the patient's intraocular pressures are normal or high, because that plays a very, very important role for having a good health of the graft, because if the pressures are high, they may lead to a graft rejection and failure. The problem lies in post-keratoplastic glaucoma is in the clinical diagnosis and the complexity of the management, because now the cornea is altered, so it is very difficult for us clinicians to accurately measure the intraocular pressures and how to proceed in these cases. An increase in IOP has been published in literature, co-access to endothelial cell loss, and a timely diagnosis is of paramount importance. So this is a small video of keratoplasty. In a case of perforated corneal ulcer, this patient had a case of had a injury with the cow tail, which was managed appropriately. Had a case of fungal ulcer, which later on developed perforation. And with appropriate management, the patient's ulcer healed, but there was an adherent leukoma. So we went ahead with penetrating keratoplasty and followed by a sequential phacoemulsification after 6 months. The patient had a pretty good vision of uncorrected vision of 6/24 and a best corrected vision of 6/6, but 6/9. And in ASOCT, we could see the adhesions, iridocorneal adhesions in the periphery. And if you see the disc, there is a little bit of enlargement of the cup with bipolar notching. So what we did, the patient had an intraocular pressure of 26 millimeter mercury, which was improved to 16 with 2 anti-glaucoma medications. And till date, the patient is doing fine with these 2 anti-glaucoma medications. The point I want to show that if you don't treat it aggressively at this stage, the patient will gradually progress to PL. With a clear cornea, the patient will not have good vision. Hence, it is very, very essential in the case of post-keratoplasty to evaluate the IOP, and if you find that the intraocular pressures are high, you need to aggressively treat with anti-glaucoma medications. And if you are not able to control the intraocular pressure with AGM, then you can also go for surgical management. But the relevant questions for post-PK glaucoma is why glaucoma happens in keratoplasty, we need to know, and how to measure the intraocular pressure and what are the management dilemmas. The risk factors for glaucoma undergoing PK, if you see here, the most important, these are the enlisted in the literature, but for me, 3 important things. The pre-existing glaucoma. If the patient is having a pre-existing glaucoma, it needs to be closely evaluated after surgery, because these patients will definitely have an augmentation or increase in intraocular pressure post-surgery and need to be aggressively treated. In case of perforated corneal ulcer also, because the angle is totally distorted, these cases may have a high risk of developing high intraocular pressure. Lenticular status, that is the phakic or a pseudophakic or an aphakic, is very, very important. If the patient is having aphakia or a pseudophakia, there may be chances of trabecular mesosphere compression because there is no support on the posterior side as well as no support on the anterior side. So what are the causes of open angle glaucoma? It may be due to an early onset, intermediate onset, or late onset. In early onset, most important is viscoelastic induced, and if you see any rise in intraocular pressure in the immediate postoperative period, you need to find out whether you have left any viscoelastic substances inside the antechamber. That is very, very important, because if there is a persistent amount, if there is a presence of viscoelastic chamber, 2 things will happen. It will raise the intraocular pressure, 1, and second, it will cause a lot of inflammation, and that inflammation may lead to graft rejection also. And if you see that there is viscoelastics left in the antechamber, you need to immediately take those patients for resurgery and remove as much as possible whatever viscoelastic substances left. And again, a pre-existing glaucoma is very important. Intermediate causes, steroid induced, because post surgery we need to give steroid for a prolonged period of time or throughout the life. The patients may have a high risk of developing a steroid induced glaucoma. So you need to be careful when you need to be judgmental in when you are giving steroid in these patients. And a graft rejection also may cause rise in intraocular pressure, and a ghost cell glaucoma can happen. In the late causes, again, steroid induced is the most important thing. What are the causes of angle closure? As I showed in the case, there is a peripheral enterosynechia. In this peripheral enterosynechia, because of the perforation, it may result in peripheral enterosynechia that may lead to increase in intraocular pressure. Sometimes wound leak happens in the immediate post-op period. If the sutures are not tight enough and there is leaking of the wound, there will be shallow AC and there will be angle compression, which may lead to rise in intraocular pressure. Compressive sutures. If you have a lot of compressive sutures, then it may lead to angle distortion and rise in intraocular pressure. Late onset glaucoma, usually due to pupillary block, malignant glaucoma, or a progressive synechial formation. These are certain tips for a cornea surgeons to reduce angle compression. The sutures need to be less tighter, it need to be deep, it need to be shorter, and the suture bite should need to be equal on either side of the wound and the graft host junction. Smaller sized grafts like 7.5 millimeter would be preferable, but in cases of therapeutic keratoplasty, you need to go for a larger graft. Donor cornea should be a little bit larger, I keep it at 0.5 millimeter oversized, and thinner recipient corneas and larger overall corneal diameter. These are certain tips how to reduce the angle compression. What are the dilemmas associated with penetrating keratoplasty? Accurate intraocular pressure measurement, visual fields assessment, which is not possible because of the high astigmatism and refractive error, and NRR analysis. Intraocular pressure is a challenge in case of post-PK glaucoma because there are changes in corneal thickness, there is a high astigmatism, and there are refractive changes. How to measure intraocular pressure? You can manage with, you can see the intraocular pressure with tono pen or a pneumatic tonometer or McKemar. But usually in our clinical practice, these instruments are not available. As I'm in private practice, these instruments are not available. So what is available with us is the Goldman. In Goldman applanation tonometer, the proper mice won't come in case of poor epithelium. And it is not accurate in cases of corneal edema or blood staining. And when there is a high astigmatism, it may give a false reading. Like with the rule, it will underestimate, and against the rule, it will overestimate. So what we have to do, you have to just rotate the prism so that the red mark is set along the least corneal curvature. And in my practice, what I do, I take two readings. One is the horizontal and the vertical, and take the average. ASOCT and UBM are beautiful tools for assessing the angle of the entry chamber, because you cannot do gonio in these cases. It's difficult to perform, and touch gonioscope. Gonioscopes are it's very dangerous because you may damage the epithelium. Hence, non-contact methods like ASOCT is a very beautiful tool for assessing the angles. You can, with ASOCT, you can see for iridocorneal adhesions, you can see the location of intraocular lens, whether the patient is having a phakic or an aphakic status, and the chamber depth, angle width, and corneal thickness can be determined with this technology. UBM is a little bit a poorer counterpart in this case, but in cases of corneal opacity, where the corneal opacity is completely obscuring the view, so then UBM is helpful, ASOCT is not helpful. But ASOCT is the advantages are it is a non-contact, it is user-friendly, and it is least dependent on the technicians. So technicians, any technicians can perform. UBM requires a little bit of practice, and a good technician has to perform it. And as such, you need to have a cup with a solution, so you're touching the cornea. So that's why I prefer ASOCT over UBM. And you can see these two pictures of ASOCT. This was the right hand side. You can see the case of penetrating keratoplasty, where the angle is a little bit shallow. And you can see the angles, the angle is 29 degree and 30 degree. Ideally, normally the open angles are around 34 degrees. And if you see less than 30 degree, you need to be a little bit careful, and you need to closely evaluate these cases. And this is another, the left hand side is the dark patient. You can see this, mark this white interface, and the angles are very pretty well open. If you are performing a lamellar surgeries, the angles are very well maintained because you are not compressing, there are no much of compressive sutures, and the angles are very well maintained, and the intraocular pressures are well maintained. But in case of penetrating keratoplasty, like the full thickness penetrating keratoplasty, you need to be very careful regarding the angles. You need to check the angles, whether there is any progressive synechia there or not, and regularly check the intraocular pressures. UBM pictures, I don't have any personal experience about UBM, but the UBM pictures are not very good, so I prefer using an ASOCT over UBM. The treatment dilemmas, when you put anti-glaucoma drugs, when you're giving beta blockers and adrenergic agonists, that the patients may have SPKs or a dry eye or a corneal anesthesia, and there are chances of chronic conjunctival inflammation. So in these cases, you need to be careful, and if you're dealing with the patient is having a dry or SPKs, you need to give a lot of lubrication so that the patient have a comfortable vision. Brimonidine with a purine preservative, that is SOC, can be used. You should avoid benzalkonium chloride preservatives. In topical carbonic anhydrase inhibitors are also very good drugs, but there's a risk of endothelial suppression and graft failure. But if the endothelial reserve is good, it can be given safely. But if the endothelial reserve is bad, you should try to avoid topical carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Prostaglandin analogs can be given with a caution because it may develop cystoid macular edema. Very important thing, it leads to reactivation of herpes. If you are performing a keratoplasty for a case of post-herpetic scar, in those cases, prostaglandin analogs should be avoided because it will lead to reactivation of the herpes. And the preservative-free units can be tried because it is better always. So you can see in this case, the patient had undergone keratoplasty for the post-herpetic scar. And because of the prostaglandin analogs we had given, it developed such a huge herpetic keratitis. And once this herpetic keratitis is developed, because it is a very difficult challenge for us to manage, because you have to give steroid also and as well as antiviral drugs, because steroid will aggravate the herpes, and antiviral drugs won't work. It will take a long period of time. And ultimately, because of the long-term inflammation, it may lead to graft rejection and failure. Steroid responders need to be taken care of. So you have to see the intraocular pressure in the immediate 6 weeks to 8 weeks period, whether the patient is responding to the steroid. If the patient is steroid responder, taper to the minimum required steroids, and if possible, switch to topical fluoromethalon, loteprednol, or rimaxolone. Cyclosporin A can also be given, but I'm not very happy with the cyclosporin drug. I prefer to give a steroid along with the anti-glaucoma medications in cases of steroid responders. Surgical treatment as laser treatment very well elucidated by Dr. Murali. But the problem is there is a risk of uveitis and graft rejection. Trabeculectomy, because of the conjunctival inflammation, there is a high chances of failure rate. Mandatory that the IOP is monitored on a regular basis after corneal transplantation and aggressively treated if found high. Uncontrolled IOP after PK is one of the the leading causes of graft failure and visual loss. So it needs to be aggressively treated. At the end, you need to have a close surveillance and an aggressive medical and surgical management to preserve the vision as well as to preserve the optic nerve. So thank you very much for the kind attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Subudhi. Such a lovely presentation, very crisp and informative, and he has covered almost everything about post-penetrating keratoplasty or post-corneal transplant surgery-induced glaucoma, right from the management, medical management, and surgical intervention as well. I have a question for Mayuri ma'am. There is a question from the audience, which is relevant here. They've asked that what is your preferred carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, topical ones? Is it dorzolamide or brinzolamide? This is a question from the audience.
Okay, both are same, but the pH is different from brinzolamide. So it is user friendly. The stinging sensation is less. The efficacy is the same. So many studies are done, and even in my practice, I have seen there is no difference as such. But the brinzolamide is better as far as the that metallic test is not there, and the stinging burning is less.
And in post PK glaucomas, you avoid carbonic anhydrase in
yes. It should be avoided because the corneal endothelium, it is already sick and count is very less. So
the reserve is good, then we can give it. But
if other drugs are possible, it should not be taken.
So if we have to give one carbonic anhydrase, what it would be? It would be brinzolamide or dorzolamide. If there is no option and giving one carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, what it would be? Both have same inhibitory effect on corneal endothelium.
If patient is affording, I will use brinzolamide.
Okay.
Actually, I'll just add one point, Prashant. Both definitely have issues, but dorzolamide is more endothelial toxic and brinzolamide is more epithelial toxic. So if I actually have to choose the last option, then brinzolamide will be preferred over dorzolamide in a post PK eyes. But as Madam has mentioned, it should always be the last option, because see, PK can fail even without your dorzolamide also. It can fail because of other reasons also. But in case you are using a dorzolamide and the graft fails, then sometimes the onus can come on you. So that issue is there. As like Ahmed Wall, post Ahmed Wall, post diode CPC, post TRAB also, we have seen cornea decompensating because of the inflammation that can induce a rejection. So then sometimes the problem comes that the TRAB gets the blame for cause of the failure of graft.
So one quick question for Murali sir. Sir, in case of medically uncontrolled post PK or post dial glaucoma, what would be your preferred surgical intervention? Would it be a trabeculectomy or it would be a tube implantation?
I think a tube is definitely a better choice, because once you already had one procedure and you had a transplant and the conjunctiva is not too good, and you generally expect that TRABs don't do so well unless you have really good mobile conjunctiva and you're sure that you can do a TRAB with mitomycin. Most of the times, I think a tube is a good option. Either the RD or the Barwell type RD or the Ahmed glaucoma vial. The only thing is that make sure that if you're putting in a tube in a PK eye, to see if you can try and put, if you're pseudophakic eye, try and put the tube behind the eye. And like I think yesterday's webinar, I think many of you might have listened, that you put the tube a little longer, keep it on the iris, don't cross the visual axis, but don't keep it too short. If you keep it too short, it tends to keep touching the cornea. The cornea is the issue here with the tube, and I would prefer to do a tube I would not consider trabeculectomy very often.
So the tube gets fixed or it is mobile inside the antechamber in the post-operative period?
No, it is not
Anterior
fixed.
migration is sometimes an issue. So it is always to fix the plate, and even after fixing the plate, I take one more suture near the limbus, so there is no side-to-side movement, and always prevent anterior migration, because then you have an elongated tube and it might touch your graft. But as Murli said, I have to do iridectomy in the periphery, so that you can see the tip of the tube, because sometimes it is difficult when you put it in.
You can't see it. Yeah, correct.
Yes.
And what about, sir, the cyclophotocoagulation, what you said about laser cyclophotocoagulation in case of post-PK glaucoma?
I think that has been a wonder treatment for me and many of my corneal surgeons who refer patients to me. And the post-PK glaucomas, the diode CPC works really well. I now have the micropulse diode CPC with me for nearly 2 years now. And the results have been excellent, because it takes away the need to going back into OT for a longer duration, doing a procedure, a tube all said and done, even in the best of hands, it doesn't work 100% all the time. You will require some correction, you will require some revision, you will require some cover up and conjunctival cover, or something else needs to be done with the tube. A laser is not like that. A laser is much simpler, at least for the patient's point of view. So I think a laser is a good option for the moderate IOPs and post-PK glaucomas. But for the ones which have very high pressures and you don't have any other choice, I think Barwell type RD is a preferred choice. And of course, the Ahmed valve is also there. Both are good choices.
Thank you so much, sir. So there's a question to Dr. Manish from audience. He has asked this is from Calcutta. So the question is there any specific disc finding in cases of pituitary tumor or empty cellar syndrome? After seeing the disc, we can doubt, or we can think about having a pituitary tumor. So any specific finding apart from pallor?
Empty cellar syndrome actually will not always have optic disc findings. But these are cases where you have a small pituitary tumor or pituitary gland, or a totally absent pituitary gland where the gland has been replaced by the CSF. So a lot of these patients do come with a headache, and some of these patients can have associated raised intracranial pressure, which can actually present as papilledema. That is the only thing you can see, but that is also not very common. Again, in pituitary tumor, depending on the site of pituitary tumor, if it's a chiasmal involvement, often we do get a temporal pallor. If it's more posterior involvement of the optic tract and all, then sometimes you don't have any finding. It's more of the clinical presentation. The patient will complain of problem in the vision, where you go for investigation. But generally, it's a bitemporal pallor is something which we get more commonly with pituitary tumors. And empty cellar, a lot of time will not have any optic disc findings.
Thank you so much, sir. So I think we have reached the time to conclude. So I'll hand over to Dr. Subudhi, sir.
Yes. Okay. So it's a really wonderful discussion. And I think our teachers here have given very good tips to the students, I would say, glaucoma students. Wonderful discussion. I'm really proud of Dr. Prashant. He was with me for 3 years at Berhampur. Rather, I would say I'm proud he's my student and doing excellent in the glaucoma field. And he gave a very good overview of glaucoma. Really, I'm so happy to hear from you, Prashant, and got a wonderful moderation. And Mayuri Madam, yes, as I told you, Mayuri Madam, I knew her in long time back in 86 when I was with Dr. Nagpal for 6 months. I met both her husband and herself 1 or 2 occasions, and she's wonderful. She has shown us 7 cases, very beautiful cases. And daily we come across glaucoma cases, how confusing we are in the treatment. So particularly in unilateral glaucomas, we confuse and we treat badly, and sometimes the patient moves from one place to another and causing irreparable loss to the eye and to the pocket also. So wonderful tips, madam. Really, I'm very happy that you have given so simplified way, and definitely our doctors, general ophthalmologists in the glaucoma definitely must have been benefited by your lecture. And Dr. Manish, again, a wonderful presentation. 4 cases, they're atypical cases. So we treat them in the line of glaucoma, whether it's general ophthalmologist, because many general ophthalmologists we treat glaucoma. Many of the medical colleges in our state do not have glaucoma specialists. So we treat ourselves. So we confuse a lot of things, lot of times about these atypical cases, and we land in trouble. Like methyl alcohol poisoning, we come across, then also pituitary adenomas, we come across day-to-day because they're referral cases. So definitely he has given a very good tip to do neuroimaging and do OCT and all these things, and always keep in the mind, keep it open that can it be not a glaucoma also. And of course, Dr. Murli definitely has given a very wide tip, a good tip when you get a refractory glaucomas or when it's a end stage of glaucomas, how to manage with the lasers. And as he said also, many times in primary glaucomas also the lasers has become primary treatment. And this micropulse species in evolution, tomorrow it may come that this laser will be given treatment for all the glaucoma cases. So in early stage even. And last but not the least, Praveen has given a really wonderful PK case and invited a lot of discussions, not only from audience, from the panelists and everything. So it's really wonderful, and I must thank Jaydeep Banerjee of Sun Pharma. He came with a proposal to hold a glaucoma meet. So I was really wondering, because in this last few days, we are all listening glaucoma only. Everybody is tired of, I don't know. So today we had more than 101 viewers. Probably they must have enjoyed the talks. So I thank everybody, all the speakers and all the panelists and all the viewers, and with having patiently hearing to us.